Hello everyone, my name is Evgeny and you're back on the ZHENATAN channel. Friends, I continue to share with you all the intricacies of making wooden barrels. And in today's video, I want to show and tell you how to properly process the crosses of wooden barrels for the subsequent installation of the heads. Processing the crosses of a wooden barrel involves several stages. First of all, this is the treatment of the outer surface of the wooden barrel. That is, we need to turn the polygon that forms when we tighten the stave itself is flat. Accordingly, when each stave is assembled like a puzzle, it creates a polygon. For the subsequent internal processing of the cross in the wooden barrel, we need to smooth out the angles between the staves, in other words, turn the polygon into a circle. To do this, we can use a grinder or an angle grinder. Clean the outer surface of the barrel, thus preparing it for further treatment of the inner part of the wooden barrel. What does this treatment involve? During the process of making a wooden barrel, even though each stave is calibrated for thickness, after charring and tightening, the staves are still, let's say, slightly misaligned on the inside. This happens because some staves get more charred, some settle a bit deeper when tightened, or there might be some other reason. That's why we need to create a perfect circle, while also ensuring that the thickness of each stave is the same. For these purposes, I use a router, a parallel guide with a tracing wheel, and several router bits. To level the inner surface of the groove, I use this kind of slot cutter with a working height of 40 millimeters, a diameter of 20 millimeters, and a shank diameter of 12 millimeters. With this cutter, I process the inner part of the groove in the wooden barrel to the required depth. At the start of the process, we need to find the stave with the smallest thickness. We position our router opposite the stave with the smallest thickness, adjust the cutter, tighten the screws on the parallel guide, and process the inner part of the groove in the wooden barrel. In this way, we level all the other staves according to this thickness. The only difference in processing barrels of large and small volumes lies in the use of this kind of homemade device. These homemade devices are fixed onto the factory guide rods of the parallel fence using these kinds of screws. There is also a small bend in the device. It is made so that the cutter works at a slight angle to the surface of the stave. This way, the cutter works across the entire working height at once. The leveling of the stave is done with minimal material removal. In other words, this is simply an additional support that rests on the opposite side of the barrel, providing extra stability. If you don't have such a device available, you can just use one or two tubes that are somewhat longer than usual, if necessary. Put them on, so to speak, extend the guide rod of the parallel fence, rest it against the opposite side of the barrel, and in the same way process the inside of the groove of a large barrel. As a result, I get staves that are absolutely identical in thickness. And now I can proceed to cutting the groove for the chime. How do you determine how deep you need to cut? When making my wooden barrels, I use this small table. I made this table myself. And in this table, depending on the size of the wooden barrel, all the dimensions necessary for its construction are specified. That is, it includes the barrel's capacity, the number of staves, the length, the width of the template in the middle and at the edges, the height of the barrel, the diameter at its widest part, the diameter at the ends, and also what we need for today's work, distance from the edge of the barrel to the groove for the bottom. Here is this column. From this column, we can see that for barrels of different volumes, the distance also varies accordingly. In other words, the larger the volume of the barrel, the greater this distance. Likewise, the width and depth of the groove or channel for the bottom also differ significantly depending on the barrel's volume. I take the necessary values from this table. For a barrel with a volume of 5 or 8 liters, the distance from the edge of the barrel to the groove is 15 millimeters. The width of the groove itself is 3 millimeters, so in total we get 18 millimeters. In order to cut the groove without any issues, we need to machine the inner part of the joint to at least 20 millimeters. So I machined the joints of 6-liter barrels to a depth of about 20 to 22 millimeters. Only after that can the groove be cut without any problems. And for cutting the groove, I use the following router bit. This is a bit for cutting side grooves. The working height is 3 millimeters, the diameter of the working part is 33 millimeters, and the shank diameter is 8 millimeters. I have installed a guide bearing on this bit, but since I couldn't find an outer ring of the required diameter, I machined the guide sleeve out of polyamide. The diameter of the guide sleeve is 27 millimeters. Therefore, the difference between the working diameter of the bit and the sleeve is 6 millimeters, which means 3 millimeters on each side. This makes it possible to cut a groove 3 millimeters deep and 3 millimeters wide as the guide wheel moves along the inside of the groove. For small barrels, I made stationary devices for cutting the groove on small barrels with a capacity of 6 to 8 liters. Here is this device. The stationary cutting depth is set to 15 millimeters. As the drive in this device, I used an electric motor from an old automatic washing machine. A mounting bracket was made along with a tensioning mechanism for tightening the belt and a bearing assembly. And this entire device is mounted on a single tabletop together with a factory-made router and a lifting mechanism made from a car jack. By the way, for those who are interested, the process of converting this router table is shown in a video link, will be in the description. You can check it out. The groove is cut in the same way as when using a handheld router. The only difference is that the process goes much faster. And the last bit we need today is a rabbeting bit for making rounded chamfers. As a result of this process, you get a beautiful rounded chamfer and the barrel looks quite attractive. In the next video, I'll show you how to make the bottom for a wooden barrel. Well, that's all for today. Friends, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.